All right, so this is Activate Science Week 1, 2017. I'm going to go over these questions and hopefully you'll understand how to answer them correctly by the end of this little screencast. Question number 1, we're looking at finches, and these finches are in the Galapagos Islands, and so this is a question that's saying finch beak depth is an inheritable trait, can be passed to offspring, and so they're looking at these two species, Geospiza fortis and Geospiza fulginosa, and they're doing a study, and this study is study 1. In study 1, they're looking at the two finches and their types of beaks, their beak depth. And so they're talking about how big the depth of the beak is. So they're saying that small beaks are good for small seeds and big beaks are good for big seeds. And so that's what they're saying. They're saying birds with shallow beaks crush and eat only small seeds, and deeper beaks can crush and eat both large and small seeds, but they prefer small seeds. And so we're looking at the finches on this island, and it gives you a chart, and it looks like the G. fortis and G. fulginosa on island B and island C. They live on two different islands, and so it looks like most of them are at 10. We've got a nice even distribution, and so we got small beaks and then large beaks, and then over here we've got a bunch of small beaks and several large beaks. And so what this tells us is that we have kind of a middle of the road here, and we've got two extremes, kind of the opposite, two different things. All right, so we're looking at a question here. It says, based on the results of study 1, that's what this study is, the highest percent of finches on island B and island C had a beak depth of what? So we're looking for the highest percent. Well, that's the highest, and that's the highest. That's at 10, and that's at 10. So we're at 10 and 10. So D is our correct answer. Study 2. After completing Study 1, the researchers returned to Island B each of the next 10 years, from 1976 to 1985. During each visit, they captured at least 50 G. fortis finches and measured their beak depths. Then they calculated the average G. fortis beak depth for each of the 10 years. The researchers noted that during the 10-year period, 3 years were exceptionally dry and 1 year was very wet. So we've got a wet year and 3 years that were very dry. And what do you notice about beak depth? We notice beak depth is really high at dry years, and it's really shallow at wet years. And so small seeds are abundant during wet years. Small seeds, wet years. During dry years, all seeds are less abundant, and size is larger during dry years. And so dry years means large seeds. Wet years means small seeds, and they're very abundant. And so during which of the following years were small seeds most likely abundant on island B? Well, small seeds are abundant in this year right here, 1984. So J is our correct answer. Study 2, we're still looking at the same thing. And so let's go back and we'll think, actually I'm going to go back here. I've already identified all of that. I'm going to erase my answer choice here. And so based on the results of study 2, would a finch with a beak depth of 9.4 or a finch with a beak depth of 9.9 be more likely to have had a greater chance of survival during 1977? So let's look at 1977. 1977 is a dry year. And so in that dry year, we're going to have large seeds, and so we want a large beak depth because that's what happens in dry years. Large seeds, are they going to be there? And so if we have a dry year, we have to have large beak. And so finch with a beak depth of 9.9, we want 9.9 as our beak depth. And so 9.9 is our beak depth, so that gets rid of this one, and it gets rid of this one. We're left with C or D, a finch with a beak depth of 9.9, because on average the size of seeds is larger during dry years. C is our answer. So in this question, we've moved to a new passage, and this is looking at another study. So this is still a research summary question type. And the substances in the atmosphere like Cu, Zn, Cl, and SO4 are carried down to Earth's surface by precipitation. This is wet deposition. All right, and so we're looking at these ions, copper, Cu, and Zn, are put into the atmosphere by high temperature combustion processes. This is just some background information. We may need it, we may not. The presence of Cl and SO4 can be attributed to road salt dust and electrical power generation, respectively. So, road salt dust and electrical power. So, in study 1, we're looking at the end of each month. All the samples collected during that month were mixed. Some of this combined sample was analyzed for the concentrations of copper and zinc. Using these data, the monthly wet deposition of each substance in micrograms was calculated. So, monthly wet deposition. So, we've got months, January, February, March, April, so on and so forth. We've got zinc, and we've got copper, and so we see that, okay, there's a spike right here, there's a higher over here, and I'm sorry for the announcements. So we got a higher point here, we got a higher point here, and so we want to look at our study 1, the average monthly wet deposition for Cu, so that's what we're looking at. We can get rid of this one. Cu, the average monthly wet deposition. So an average, we want to see what the average is. And so if we were to draw kind of a line of best fit, there's a number down here, there's a number down here. All of these are kind of like in this area right there. And so what's our average? Our average is between 50 and 100. So between 50 and 75 even is where our average is going to be. So between 50 and 75, so G is our correct answer. All right, and I think this is our last question. We have another portion of the combined sample for each month was analyzed for the concentrations of Cl and SO4. And so we've got two new ions. We've got chlorine and sulfate. And so using this data, monthly wet deposition was measured. And these are milli equivalents, so you don't need to know what that is, right? But it's very tiny because it's got the word milli. And so we're looking at the statement, the values for Cl wet deposition were greater during the winter and early spring when road salt is typically applied. Well, remember, this is a road salt production. That was what was in the information at the beginning. And so this is winter and early spring. Is there more road salt during winter and early spring? Well, probably. And so is that supported? Is there more Cl during the winter months? Well, January to April and then November and December, there's one little thing right here, like a little blip. There might not have been as much road salt in December, but generally we're looking at this one and this one, and all of these, those are all pretty well higher than all the other ones. In the months that we don't have a lot of road salt, we've got these down here, and so these higher ones are probably good. So I would say I would agree. So we can get rid of these two answers. And so yes, because Cl wet deposition values were on average greater from November, or were they less? Well, they were greater, and so A is our correct answer on this one. And that was it. So if you guys have questions, you can find Mr. Stewart and ask me. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of Activate.